Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Not sure who else is going to join us. I know there's a couple that wanted to, but yeah, here we go. So we'll let them in as they come. The intention for today was simply to have a open Q&A kind of discussion space. I have a list of questions that I'm going to address from Instagram, and I'm going to go live on Instagram as well. I wasn't going to, but I think it's just better through the Awaken Kitchen page. And but anything you guys are sharing here, only I can hear, so don't worry about that. If you have anything that you don't want other people to hear, we are in the enclosed space of Zoom, which is nice. But for those on Instagram, you can ask questions as well. I had a list of topics or some simple questions that I thought were quite universal that I hear quite often that we'll address just like we have every week, really. And then yeah, as we're kind of settled, then if you have other questions or comments or things you'd like to share, then we can dive into that, within the framework of the topics we've explored in this detox course. It's been nice to explore this with all of you, and I feel like we really went into some real foundational stuff that, as you can see, it's just because we went through all of those topics in the course, it's things that obviously we're cycling back, and we're cycling through, and we're going through these layers, and just kind of repeating the process of these principles, right? And so one of the questions that I got from Instagram that was pertaining to intermittent fasting, right? And what the benefits are of that, or what my experience is. And so obviously that's something we covered quite at length within the whole course, so for those that haven't watched those recordings, highly recommend to do so. But with the dry fasting, or just specifically intermittent fasting, which generally we're going to look at intermittent dry fasting, intermittent water fasting is okay, but if you really want to get the real benefits, I would just, again, extend the sleep. That's pretty much what we're doing, right? We're extending our sleep, not by sleeping, but by recognizing that the real benefit of sleep is fasting. It's the lack of consumption. And so when we're extending that, we're just extending, like, think about that. The majority of the population looks at sleep as a rejuvenating tool, right? And goes to bed, go to sleep and feel rejuvenated, etc. So if we are able to consciously expand that time, right? Like in my view, the practice of presence or meditation and dry fasting are both like equally, if not more rejuvenating, more powerful for our vitality than and similarly like with sleep, right? So you have now basically two new tools that you're navigating that are prolonging the benefits that we have every night when we go to sleep. And so if we can do that every day, right, where we're extending the sleep period of 6 to 8 hours to a period of dry fasting, which is just extended rejuvenation of rest to 12 to 20 hours, and that's done every single day, we can see what the benefits of that would be, right? It's quite profound, really, to see what the benefits of that would be. So dry fasting, intermittent dry fasting, in my view, was one of the most noticeable and profound tools that I had ever implemented on this journey. Many fasts, many different approaches, many different integrations and cycles, but dry fasting has been the most consistent and the most obvious in its consistent, I just said consistent twice, in the reality of the changes and the shifts that emerge, right, on so many levels. Because in truth, all we're doing is we're living out the natural state, right? Because dry fasting is living in the natural state. So when you're just living your natural state, you start to really tune into that subtle blissfulness and love and peace and ease within the body on a very consistent basis, right? So that window of eating is just slower, like smaller and smaller. But when that window is open and we engage, well, we engage in it in just as a devotional way, right? And of course, like I mentioned before, right, the more that fasting is a part of the lifestyle, the more you actually appreciate food, the more you become a foodie, in a certain sense, just probably not consuming things that, are going to create the imbalances too much, right? It's not that we can't go into whatever, really whenever we want, um, but often those who argue for that, right, like, oh, I want to indulge, I want to do this, they've often have never really had a chance to see what's on the other side, so they don't really know the difference of what the feeling is, right? So if we just are inundated with pleasures all the time, and then every life becomes constantly about pleasures and pleasures and pleasures, well, at a certain point that's going to run dry, right? At a certain point that's going to run dry. And so if we consciously engage that, then we're not like blindsided by it, which is kind of nice, right? So yeah, those on Instagram, if you have questions and stuff, feel free to engage. So that was the first question I want to address because it's the most accessible. Everyone can do that in my view. We already do it. So just extending dry fasting, intermittent dry fasting windows a couple hours, you'll start to see the differences. It's quite obvious. And maybe some of you can share, your experience on that from this most recent flow. But it seems like most of you were implementing some form of intermittent dry. And to me, it's just a mindset shift, right? It's not like something you're not already doing. That's the beautiful thing. So when I look back like 4 or 5 years starting that, well, it really was just skipping breakfast, that's pretty much all it was. And boy, like what a reversal, my whole life taught, oh, gotta eat breakfast, gotta eat breakfast, gotta eat breakfast. And then all of a sudden you don't. And then you start seeing how beneficial that really can be, right? But it also doesn't mean that has to be for you, right? You could, the intermittent dry fasting window could be earlier in the day. It's just that in my experience, and if you look at, if you've ever seen the circadian rhythm charts, right, where the circadian rhythm, which basically is your body's inner energy compass or timeline, it starts to boost up, anywhere from 5-6 a.m. and it starts to rise towards, midday to mid-afternoon, and then that's when we get that crash, right? You get actually kind of like two little spikes, and then you get that crash, that 2 to 5 p.m. kind of nappy time, and then around 5 to 8, that's when it builds up again. So those are the windows of eating that should be respected, right? That's why, in my view, it's more beneficial if you're going to do intermittent dry that you're doing it where the eating window is later in the day, but not too late, right? And that could depend on a couple other things too. Even human design, PHS could change that a little bit, but but as long as you're not eating too close towards bedtime, unless you're a nocturnal PHS where you should eat in the nighttime, which is quite unique and quite rare. But that is one of them, so that is something to look at too. But nonetheless, the overall rule I generally like to live by is not sleeping, not digesting on during sleep. So 2 to 3 hours before bed would probably be best. But like I said, if you did want to eat earlier, and then your dry fasting window is from midday to later. Actually, in a lot of yogic traditions, some of them wouldn't eat past like lunchtime, right? So that's another approach too. If your eating window, consumption window is small, 4 to 6 hours, then it doesn't really matter too much where you put it, right? And it could change every day. It doesn't have to stay static. So just keep that in mind and at heart. So yeah, that was the first question. I don't know if there's any shares or anything from those in Zoom, and again on Instagram, if there's other questions or things you want me to discuss, feel free. But yeah, if there's anything on that or related, then put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. Otherwise, I'm going to continue with a couple of things. So yeah, for those on Instagram, we're just we're doing this live mainly on Zoom, but I have it here so you guys can listen in. If there's other questions, go ahead. So the next topic I wanted to just cover, because this is another question, was in regards to more extreme, or maybe not just extreme, but just detox symptoms in general, and how to deal with the ebbs and flows, right? Because You know, like anything, we go in waves and we go in cycles. So say we're embarking on a new habit, and almost initially, instantly, we may start to see a lot of difference, you know, a lot of change, a lot of positive movements on the topic or in the scenario in our life. And then we may start to hit a roadblock at a certain time, right? And then that roadblock kind of makes us question, oh, you know, am I doing the right thing? Should I continue this? Is this really for me? You know, a lot of the doubts and all these things start to arise. And so most of the time, especially when we're dealing with things that we could say are vetted, right? They're rooted in true principle. They have a track record, right? Like, you know, when it comes to these types of principles from the many different doctors or individuals I've learned from, and some who I've shared with you guys with, I mean, the track record is like, you know, like just on a whole other universe than the traditional track record when it comes to healing, especially chronic issues or things that we most often die from, or, you know, is so common to be to have in our life and to have for our whole life. Sometimes the track record of healing with these principles is just, it's just obvious, it's common sense at this point. So when we're dealing with things like this, then, you know, sure, there may be specifics with the approach that we're dealing with that sometimes have to be adjusted, but the majority of the time, the doubts don't really have to do with the actions or the principles or the system that's being presented. It's often our own inner energies that we're coming to face, right? Like when we're changing a habit, the brain and the nervous system, or the entities and the emotions that feed off of that old patterning, they will do everything that they can, which is just another aspect of you, but we say they as just a contextual idea. But you know, the resistance in the form of doubts and thoughts, and, you know, that devil on the shoulder saying, oh, you don't need to keep going, it's okay, you know, don't you know, this isn't even working anyways, blah 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 blah, all that stuff. That is the energy of the shadow that is literally being integrated and being brought to the surface as a part of also a detoxification symptom, because detoxification symptom is not just the physical things that are happening in the body. It's also the thought forms, right? The emotions, it's all the things that are coming to the surface, the entities, right? The parasitic entities that exist not only physically but etherically. These beings feed off of your suffering. They feed off of the death and the decay and the downward spirals that we tend to find ourselves in, right? The majority of your negative thoughts, the majority, in my view, the majority of mental health issues are entity based. They are parasitic entity based. They are etheric entity based. And there's a lot of psychologists actually talking about this now, where, you know, they would start bringing these things up about the fact that, you know, they would have all these cases where they just had no real explanation other than that. And this is not recognized enough in the traditional medical world, where there are energies and entities and beings and all that that are in and out of all of our energy fields, to be honest. I mean, it's in such a it's such a profound space, the eternal universe, right? So we're not just dealing with the parasites in our own body. So when we have thought forms that just don't feel like our own thought forms, or we have these things that are arising that are just of self-doubt or hatred, or, you know, low self-esteem, and all these things, these are not your own, right? These are not your own. So we have to really start to take a look at that, especially when we're going through these phases of healing, on any level of healing, because these are the things that will tend to come to the surface. And so, well, what to do? Well, the core is the same of what we have done before. And in the detox course that, you know, you guys have been a part of, we went through a lot of other supportive tools and supportive habits, right? The breath work, the connection to the elements, the connection to loving and compassionate, being loving and compassionate to other beings, you know, like understanding that every time you're suffering something, someone else is also suffering that. So the beauty of being in a loving and compassionate space to those around you, even while you're in these spaces, that's one of the greatest ways we can heal, because it's all us anyways. right? So it's all ourselves. We're all facing similar things in some way. So all of these habits, all of these approaches are never something that can be let up. This is one thing that's important, you know, like even at a space of realizing your true nature, where you've realized the original illusion that brings rise to all suffering, this still doesn't give you a free ticket to just give up on what brings most joy. It's just that you wouldn't want to do anything else anyways, right? For some reason, when we're in the depths of our own illusion, we somehow want to do things that bring self-harm, but it's not us, you know. It's these other energies that move through us, these other forces, right, of the universe. So when we have a clarity about this, that we are never to let up on our practices, like especially in the times that we're in, where there is so much going on within the seen and unseen realms. And so the essence of our consistency, like ruthless consistency on a certain level, you know, in the most positive and beautiful manner when I say ruthless, but like that's the level of the degree of involvement that we have to be within the present moment awareness, where we're never letting up. We're perpetually in the movements of our creative energy and listening, right? Listening to the body, listening to our surroundings, listening to what's happening, humbling ourselves to really hear what's around us. That's what gives way for the perpetual movements of our eternal spark, right? And that's really all that matters when it comes to healing, because that always guides the way, right? Of whether we eat or don't eat, whether we engage this practice or that, whether we listen to this person or that, whether we want to engage this creative, you know, process or that. That's all perpetually guided from that vantage point. But that the term ruthless is actually very accurate, because it isn't just this love light and fairies space. Anyone who says that has not faced the depth of their own shadow, right? It's we have to be willing to recognize and come to accept the fact that the universe we're living in has a very dark history, and we're a part of that, and we also are part of that very dark history. So those things that we're facing when we go through this process are coming to the surface for us to come to finally humble and accept that fact, right? And that's actually the doorway through it, right? It's the doorway to come and develop a relationship with all these different forces and energies within ourselves, outside ourselves, right? Where we're not painting enemies of things. That's certainly not it. We're not painting enemies of all these different things, like even the idea of viruses and, you know, germs and fungi and bacteria. We've created a war ground, a battleground in our own body, thinking we have to fight all these things. We got to protect and defend and all this stuff. But the reality is, if we set up the terrain properly, these things are not going to be there, or they're going to be there in more balanced quantities, that it's not overwhelming us in any particular way, right? And so certainly there's boundaries to be had, and that's kind of what we're dealing with now. We're like, you know, the idea, you know, one common thing that people are fearful of is like the enemas, like putting something up your butt, or, you know, these things of these deeper cleaning practices that, you know, people view as extreme or this or that. But the reality is that we've lived extreme, right? We've lived extreme for a very long time. So we're actually rebalancing that extreme way of living with other things that are viewed as extreme. But of course, it's going to be extreme from the vantage point of the pendulum that's all the way up here, right? You know, where you have 20, 30, whatever years of fecal matter in you. Was a woman on my Facebook who, you know, she was talking to me about, she was commenting on a lot of my posts recently about, you know, pulling out the stuff. And initially she was quite hesitant, because she's been in so much pain, so much chronic issues, so like for so many years, you know, doctor after doctor after doctor, test after test after test, like they normally pull you through for years of all this shit. And nothing was really working. So, you know, she was starting to consider this idea of pulling stuff out, you know, her colon or whatever, right? And so although she didn't want to do the fasting, she's like, okay, well, maybe I'll do a colonoscopy, you know, like hydrotherapy, which I actually view to be a great practice. Enemas to me is better in the juice cleanse, but colon colonoscopy or hydrotherapy can be very profound. And so she just embarked on that, the past couple of weeks, and she's already pulled out, like she said, like 7 pounds. She's obviously not done yet, but 7 pounds of stuff, fecal matter inside of her, just deep inside. So that's a lot, right? Like if only a couple sessions of that. So you can imagine, like many of you already experienced in this colon cleanse, how much is coming out, right? And how much more may be in there. So that's the reality, right? Like Christelle's here, yeah, fairies, yeah, ruthless devotion. That's it. Hey, Christelle. It's just, that's what it is, right? Like, because if you don't have that ruthlessness about you in a certain way, you're going to get overrun by your own demons, your own darkness, your own shadow that doubts and that questions and that it justifies, rationalize why you don't need to do this or that, why you don't. And the reality is, you don't have to do any of it. You don't have to do anything. There's nothing that you need to do to be already what you are. Now, from the vantage point of what you are as light, if you then have aspects of self that are manifesting delusion, because although we are a holistic being, we are also in a process of recalibrating or pulling back the fragmentation of that holistic being. That's what it means to navigate your template, right? The anatomy of God, your template. If you don't have a perceptual awareness of the entirety of your template, then it means that our pieces are hidden from yourself. You have aspects of yourself that are hidden from yourself. So let's look at it very practically. If you don't have a real communication, let's say with your gut, right? So much stuff is stuck in there. Like the majority of people are not really that sensitive with food, right? Like they can just eat all kinds of shit for years and years. It's because they're just coated in plaque. So there's no real communication being done with the gut that strongly. Nothing is really being heard because there's so many layers that are blocking and fragmenting that communication. But then over the years, as that starts to pull out and all of that starts to clean up, your communication is actually really on point. You can really feel your organs in a very visceral way, right? So when you put something in the body and your body almost immediately is saying, no, like, what did you just put in me? Well, that's the communication we're talking about, right? Where no longer are you fragmented within your own, like, say, organ system. Your organ systems are working like an orchestra and they're communicating with you like an orchestra, right? Like if you were a conductor in an orchestra and there was one person playing like hella loud or hella softly, and it's supposed to be this full orchestra, like where you're working in cohesion, you would be very obvious. So this is what we're dealing with. And this is actually a very not a very literal example, because each of your organs oscillate at a certain frequency. And when they're damaged, the frequency of that oscillation will be off. So the inner music that you are creating is off, and that frequency will then be manifested in your reality. Your organs are literally like musical instruments. And we think, okay, well, the digestive system is there for us to put things in it. No, not necessarily. Even though that's the way the physical body is now, sure. So there is a purpose to everything, and part of the purpose in the GI tract, of course, is digestion. But we're also digesting primarily information. Everything has a frequency and information. So when we're putting things in our body that hold certain levels of information, that's why encrypting liquids with our intention or food with our intention, right? Like if we're going to eat meat, well, understand this about eating meat. You are taking the responsibility of being the vessel now for the soul of that being, right? When you eat meat, you are now the vessel for the ascension of that soul. You're taking the responsibility of that. And many of the ancients and the indigenous knew this. That's why there was such a reverence and a ritual around every meat, a piece of meat that they ever ate or used in some form. So if we are to commune with our food and our ingestion in this way, we're encrypting the information that we're consuming now in a new way. And that goes for everything, the music and the entertainment and the sexual interactions, like all of these things are information exchanges. And that's primarily what the digestive system is for, is to process that information. That's why the microbiome sends more information upwards than the brain does down, because it is the main area that consumption from the outside comes in and gets processed, right? So yeah, I mean, that's quite a topic, right? And so when we start to look at things more, not in the form of nutrients and proteins and all the stuff we've been indoctrinated to think is the most important, the only thing that's important, we're coming into a more subtle way of processing this and understanding this. And that's part of the perspective behind like the cooked juices, the cooked dark grape juices, right? The pasteurized juices with the lemon. We're not really concerned about nutrients at that point. We're focusing on what like Dr. Gino from Masterfast would talk about, like the plasmatic field that's created by these juices that acts as the liquid drain out to pull it out, you know, pull everything out, and really go through a deep cleansing. So yeah, so that was a long little thing, but hopefully helpful. I'm just going to look at a question from Viviana. How's it best to break the juice fast after 7 days, only juice? Well, I did forget to upload the session 5. So I just did that last night. So I will post that in the Telegram group. Again, those who don't know what I'm talking about with the detox course, I would just get the course. I just lowered the price again for just the recordings, because all these questions and so much more is covered in like at length. So you'll really be on board with everything, or at least the core of it, if you want to go back and watch that. So actually, let's see if I can link that link. But Viviana, so okay, so the session 5 is up, so I would recommend first watching that. But second, just gonna make sure. I think this is the link. Yeah, so, but I will cover this a little bit now, like when it comes to breaking the fast, just as a review, because, you know, it's a potentially more important element than the actual fast itself. I mean, anyone can fast, anyone can stop eating, stop drinking, you know, or just do juices for a couple days. And often, I mean, when we look at it, when we're in the dire space of looking to find relief, it's actually the easiest thing to do, just stop eating, right? So like that quote that I've reiterated many times would say is, you know, any fool can fast, but only a master can break one properly. And it's very true in my experience. I've been breaking this past 10-day dry. That was the only thing I was actually a bit concerned about, because I've had experiences where I've binged a bit after or things. And of course, my like definition of binging is like, I don't know, eating some holistic quinoa crackers or something like this, you know, like not even that much, or I don't know, eating too much fruit too soon. Like it's at a whole other level of subtlety, I guess, than in previous times in my life. But the point being, especially when we look at all food as emotional, right? All consumption of food is emotional. You will notice this even in like the deepest layers of fasting, right? Like, okay, coming out of a dry, the first 2 days, I'm drinking like a gallon or more of liquids, right? Like literally just wanting to like sip and taste liquids so much. It's like, you're so grateful, but part of the energy of emotion is also there. The emotion of wanting to reward myself, right? Oh, I've been a good boy. I've done 10 days dry. I need to reward myself now, right? I'm tasting it. I'm excited. Oh, this water. Oh, this like baking soda, you know, pineapple juice. Oh, and then you're just going for it. And again, it's just emotional. You're not really thirsty. You don't really need all that. It's too much, you know? So then, you know, you put on the water weight back, and I like went back up to, you know, almost the weight I started. So it's interesting to see that dynamic, right? Where even in the most subtle of ways, we'll still consume with the same patterns, and those patterns are emotional. So that's the thing with the breaking of the fast, is being really mindful, and it's why that it's a long-term process. It's moving forward and moving back, you know, because like if I were to have done this 10-day dry maybe years ago, then maybe that emotional eating would have went into something much heavier, and something that would feel way worse than a bit of too much coconut water or something like this, right? And that's where, you know, the discipline is important, where we have to be mindful about how we're navigating, because if not, then yeah, like, you know, I mean, dry juice fasting and stuff, and even 7 days, it's kind of hard to really fuck it up too much, you know, like unless you're extremely toxic and then you're going from 7 days to like a huge thing of like beef or something like this. Even that's not going to be like life-threatening, but it could certainly cause some serious complications, right? Because remember what's happening. Well, your whole digestive system has been at rest for 7 days. Your intestinal tract is like paper thin. Everything is cramped down. So if you put up a huge steak in you, well, all of a sudden that whole system has to expand and expand. And that's where, you could start tearing things or, creating some real, certainly very uncomfortable feelings in the body, because the microbiome is not the same as what it was, right? You're not used to processing everything. So generally the common rule is for every 4 to 5 days of fasting, that's 1 full day of breaking the fast. And generally we're just going back down the pyramid or the spiral that we'll show. Vanessa created this really amazing picture about what we were talking about in the course, which I'll post. But we're basically just going back down a level, right? So in regards to juice fasting, well, we're going back down to fruits maybe. So you're going like a full day on only fruits, right? And maybe just monomeal fruit. So it's very simple and your body can just get used to processing again. And then the second day, maybe half the day you're doing that. And then by the end of the day, you're back into maybe some cooked veggies like cauliflower, small meal of cauliflower, or a salad, maybe not even cooked anything, right? Like just a raw salad. And then by day 3, you're pretty much back to, whatever maybe level, maybe you're at plant-based or something like this, and progressively going with that. But 7 days, 2 to 3 days on a break is a nice number. It gives you enough time to cycle back in a methodical way. And you're gonna feel it. Like if you start feeling like your body's like, you're gonna get, potentially tired. You potentially can get the feeling of like you just took a hit of drugs or alcohol. I remember so clearly actually after my 40-day juice fast. I came back. I broke it kind of quick, but not drastically quick, but quick enough. And I was still only eating a bit of like plantain chips and tomato, and I was feeling drunk. I felt like I was drunk, like you're drunk on the drug of food, right? And it was so clear to me how much food, especially cooked food, is like a drug. It affects you and stimulates you. It's stimulating, right? The adrenals, right? Where our adrenals are shot, most of us. So that's a lot of because of the stimulating foods, the cooked foods, the spicy foods, the meats, the coffees, the alcohol, and the drugs. All of it. But yeah, so you're gonna experiment and you're gonna meet your match either way. I don't think there's anything that can really prepare you for just facing the experimentation of breaking a fast properly or improperly. At least you have the framework, so it won't be drastic. But you really do, you want to watch it, because if you're going anything more than 7 to 10 days on liquids, or certainly like water or dry, but we're not even gonna get into the dry, then that's where things are a bit more serious in regards to breaking properly, right? Because you want to be easy on yourself, right? And you can reverse an entire progress of fasting by improperly breaking it. Just remember that, right? Like full 7 days, sure, you got the colon out, all this, but then all of a sudden you're putting all this crap in there too quickly, and you're damaging your liver, your kidneys, your intestinal tract, your stomach. Because remember, everything now is much cleaner. Everything now is much cleaner. So what you put into it now, that's going to really set the tone, because like every time we go through these longer periods of fasting, your microbiome is basically resetting, right? So whatever you put into it in those initial periods after, your microbiome is rebuilding based on what's being put in. So that's where it's important for us to stay clear on that, right? Like, it's common sense at that point. If you're clean, it's like anything, right? Like if you have a really dirty house and you spill something, it doesn't really like make that much of a difference. But if your house is really clean and you spill something, well, it's quite obvious, right? So, that's a good analogy, I guess, what we're dealing with. Oh yeah, you're also asking how to continue with the pudding or the psyllium husk. So those that don't know, on the Instagram, we have a nice psyllium husk mixture that gave out as a recipe, or you can buy it. But you can continue. You can basically continue with the pudding all the time, like even if you're eating heavier meals, because it's really just fiber. So it's just going to help pull stuff out. It's just that, if you're eating a heavier diet and you think that, you're going to keep using the pudding, it could just be not overkill, but it's like, it's not really going to the best use, right? It's going to be the most useful when you're on more of the liquids, maybe fruit, right? But you technically can use it, whenever, if you like, right? And same with the enemas. I mean, the enema is like a cheat code in my view, right? A beautiful cheat code. It's not even a cheat code because it's not a cheat. It's actually a very natural thing to do, the enema. Like I posted in the Telegram group, I was in the gospel, the Essene Gospel of Peace. Jesus is literally telling you to do enemas, with the stick or whatever. I don't know what they used back then, right? But so it's literally in the scripture to clean yourself from the water with the sacred water, the angel of water, through the inside, through your other end, right? I mean, your rectum is just the lips of the other side of your lips. Like it's there's no real difference between the rectum and this mouth here. It's the same connector, right? So it's a very sacred thing, actually, in my view, to do enemas. It's a very sacred thing to start to engage that that area of your body, because you are you're really starting to understand the full connection, right? The full cycle of what comes in and what goes out. But from the standpoint of using enemas as a means to clean up your mistakes, that can be very helpful, right? If you are in these cycles of eating in these different ways, you're naturally going to go through periods where you go back to something, or your body's rejecting something. You start to feel the bloating, the sulfur burps, which are like in my view, that's probably the most hellish thing I've ever been through, the sulfur burps. Holy crap. But those sulfur burps, which is basically like a form of acid reflux, is a symbol of, poor food combining, right? Combining fruits with nuts, or, sweet fruits with melon, eating watermelon with a bunch of other stuff. Like these are the things you'll start to learn about raw foods, right? In regards to food combination. And that's the primary way you're going to get bloating, but there's other ways. So say you eat different things and it's just not sitting with you, you go eat some vegan sushi or this or that, and it's just not working. You feel it, it's going down in all these different ways. Well, these are opportunities to, use the enema tool, right? Clean it out, just flush it out completely. You do a couple enemas and you're going to make room, right? So that cleans up the mistake sometimes when you go back, or you go into something that doesn't feel so good. You don't need to sit there and know if sure, feel the pain and accept it, blah, blah, blah. But, if you have a tool that can just clean it and flush it out, as long as you're not doing that all of the time, right? Because in some way that could also represent like a bulimic type of energy too, if it becomes a consistent pattern, right? But we're not falling into judgments or labels here. We're going with the flow, and that is a way that can certainly help. The enemas are such a key tool, and everyone resists it. Literally, like almost everyone that I've talked about enemas is always like, oh, can I not do it, or can I do something else? Or it's like, no, you can't. Just do it. Like, right? Like, of course you can. I mean, you can go and do other things, but it's not as bad as it, you think it is. And second, it's a very natural thing. It's a very natural thing. It's not like this synthetic approach. I mean, every culture, the yogis would literally pull. The yogis would literally put towels through their whole body. They would pull a towel out through the other end of their body, or they would put towels in through their nose and pull it out their mouth, like pieces of cloth to clean out their body. Like there's all kinds of things that we've done. So enemas is one of the most graceful in my view. So I hope that makes sense. That's a real like, it's not even a hack. It's just such a beautiful tool in my experience on this path, because we're rebalancing, and the rebalancing can take many years. There's another question here. Would you follow a particular moon cycle to the fasting? Yeah. So we, my friend, Fasting with Tyler, he was mentioning about Ekadashi once on a call, and that was just as we were doing this detox group on a session 1 or 2 or whatever. And so Ekadashi is a certain period of the moon cycle that's just before the full moon, just after or just before the new and the new moon. So you can look it up, Ekadashi, what are the Ekadashi cycles, and that seems to be one of the best periods. But I don't really go by that. That's only recent that I was interested in, sharing that. But I've heard it before. People also fast around full new moons as well, which makes sense because there's a lot of interference at those times. So like at a full moon, the peak of a full moon, that's where a lot of parasites will be awake, not only physically, but astrally, right? They'll be in your field or trying to interact. So that can be a time where no consumption is happening so that you can really be clear. Because the beautiful thing, if we're understanding that everything we put in our body is information, if we're constantly consuming information, then it's constant noise. So if we have constant noise, we may not really be able to always decipher what's of a true inner arising of a thought or a perception or communication of the higher self, right? Versus all the other stuff that is going, so that's why it's very helpful to get silent and to in balanced quantities, get away from all the consumption, right? And in my view, in the full moon time, that is a decent time, because you can start to get really clear with what is your own and what isn't, right? What's just coming through the field, you're picking it up like a radio antenna kind of thing. So I hope that answers your question there. I just want to, Hans, I see your hand there. So 1 second, I just want to see if there's anything more on that piece that I'd like to get into. Well, we were just talking about this, the Enemas, Psyllium. Yeah, so yeah, Hans, if you have something to ask or share, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm wondering now how bad is doing denser stuff, like like heavier foods or like denser information. Is it something that we drastically like to give an example, in my path, it's changing automatically a little bit, but the energy or what I'm getting from you, it's that we should be really, really careful. Yeah, I don't know if you mean it like that, but correct me if I'm seeing it wrong. But we should be really careful with the denser stuff and avoid it as much as possible. How is it something that's natural in a development that we're still giving into denser stuff? Is it something that we drastically have to focus on? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah, good question. So for those on Instagram who can't hear, Hans was asking about just the nature of consumption of denser foods. Obviously, when we're talking about detoxification, we're wanting to move away from denser things because that's what gives the opportunity for healing. So I'll frame it more on this focus. And I was reminded of this, a screenshot at a little comment from, an old mentor of mine, Gino, with the Master Fast, Dr. Gino, who basically said, like, healing and eating generally are not said in the same sentence, right? Like healing and eating like as a simultaneous experience is not generally how healing occurs, right? And it's just so clear. Like even in the densest of individuals, when they get sick, usually appetite is lost. And that's because the body needs the rest. It wants to heal. It does not want to put any more time or energy into digestion. It needs to get rid of or deal with the bacteria, the toxins, whatever's inside that is needing to get out, right? It's all a symptom of the body is overworked and overtaxed. So now stop overtaxing it and overworking it primarily by eating and give it a break. So healing and eating are not things that generally come together. So this is where, and this is what this course has been kind of an initiation into, right? Where when we talk about the topic of dry fasting also almost becomes like the slate cleaner, the thing that literally can like wipe away years and years and years of poor habits and gunk and illness and disease. So when we look at it from this standpoint, it almost doesn't matter so much about what our regular diet is if we're in a consistent regular cycling of fasting. And And then because we're approaching it from that perspective, it's natural that foods will just fall away like a leaf off a tree, because this process is not about avoiding anything. It's not about resisting anything. It's not even about like well, particularly resisting and pushing things away. It's not really about that, because the more that happens, the more you're going to want it, right? And so that's why often, like if you're on a fasting cycle and then you're getting a certain strong craving, right? Initially, yeah, you want to see if you can deal with that. You want to move through it. You want to see where the motion's coming from, and kind of engage and flow with the other things that could be not being addressed, right? And I'm going to get into a really good example of this in a minute. But there are so many things often that are not addressed first before we engage in those said cravings, right? Because of course it's easier to go in the craving. So we do as much as we can to, you know, work the breath work, to get up and go for a walk, to move the body a little bit, you know, to maybe continue a couple days, even though the detox symptoms are strong and the cravings are strong. And then maybe at a certain point, you're just like, okay, I'm done. I feel good. I'm going to engage this craving, right? And so then, you know, break the fast or whatever the cycle is. And then maybe you go into that craving. And 100% of the time, the engagement in the craving is not as good as how the mind was fantasizing about it. It's never as good. There's no desire that's ever as good as how the mind fantasizes or imagines it to be. So then you go and you learn that lesson and you're like, all right, well, yeah, it wasn't really for that. I didn't really need that. I wasn't really interested in it that much is what I thought it was. I can appreciate it and I can love it and I can engage it with the utmost, you know, appreciation and reverence. But there's a nice lesson, right? And so then we keep cycling, and that could take like months, years, right? Where you come back to these different cravings, but it's just like it's so short-lived. It's so really not what is being you know, imagined. It like what you're imagining it to be. Um, but it's just as much of a part of the process as any other part of the process. And we went into that about the meat, right? Like I'm not necessarily anti-meat in the sense that when we're going through these stages of our ascension, our integration, our processing, our healing, there's times, yes, where going back, and for most people, I'd say this is relevant, you know, going into the denser foods to actually help the D3 body, dimension 3 body integrate, where you can actually come into the density of the physical plane, and it helps you integrate, it helps you stabilize a lot of the higher energies that you're processing. So that could be just a once a week thing, right? I think people, you know, they take anything and they go to extreme. Oh, it's 3 times a day I need to eat, you know, the meats and stuff, right? Like, no, we're talking about like something like maybe even just once a week or every 2 weeks if you're in this transition. Some of you may be far through that transition and you have no real craving for that, and you feel no real desire to consume anything like this, then that's also fine, right? But we're not getting dogmatic with anything. Like there could be a period that you go through where you're like, okay, I'm just craving this. And then you go into it and you realize, actually, no, I'm not. That was just my mind. That was something else communicating, right? Or I just needed it for that one bite. So, you know, it's not about like running away from this or that and all that. You know, one thing I would say though is I would keep it as much as we can to the things that are of the natural world, right? Because of course there's a difference between eating like a freshly hunted deer or something compared to like, I don't know, like the fucking crazy Twinkie candies and shit we can buy these days, or some like Joe Louis, or I don't know, some microwave dinner or something like this. Like these things that are heavily processed, heavily filled with all this other stuff. Like to me, I don't really see any value in that other than potentially a healing sense of like nostalgia, right? Or something where there's some sort of healing experience that happens, which is quite rare and few and far between. So it's not something we can base any principle in other than like divine guidance. I hope you understand what I'm saying here, right? So I feel the same or similar when it comes to like things like meat, but way less so. Like anything in the natural world for me, like there are properties to that could have some validity and relevance. But again, coming back to the first thing I started with, which is healing and eating are not things that come together, right? So if we're in the healing mode, let's focus on the healing mode, like the detoxification, the less is more, the art of subtraction. That's the fasting, the dry fasting, the juice fasting, water fasting. It's the fasting periods, like pretty much period. Then from there, the fruits and the plant-based and the raw, that can also be somewhat healing, not because of the food, but because there's, again, less digestion happening. So again, more space to breathe, because you're not really healing when you're digesting the food, but it's going to take you like a fraction of the time to digest some strawberries than it will to like a steak. So again, it's the fasting, it's not the food. So if we just get that in our mind and we really start to see that firsthand, you'll start to see, not only will you be more interested in the dry fasting conversation, which we're going to get into in the next layers, which we already really touched on, and it could take years for that to really come to fruition, but that will be there. And then you also won't be so dogmatic with the eating, right? Because if you can do a dry fast that's 3 to 5 days, that can reverse like a very long period potentially of eating poorly, then eating like something here and there, and indulging in this here and there, like that's not going to really make that much of a difference, right? But if we're talking about the information thing, then we will get more cognizant about encrypting our meals, right? Infusing energy into our liquids and into our foods, right? Of course, the foods that have more water, that are more alive, will be easier to encrypt because they hold water. So you can encrypt that water. If it's something that's very dead, it's harder to encrypt it, but it can be done, right? So every meal, there's a prayer, there's a reverence, there's an energy of you clearing out what's there because it's information. So like I said, I'm touching like many layers here, right? Like healing can happen in many different combinations, but there are like fundamental general principles that I think most of us understanding here, and those don't change. They've never changed. They never will change. That's just how it is. But divine grace is beyond all rules, all dogmas. So we have to always come back to our own guidance, and the natural fluidity of things, while also staying humble to the fact that 99% of the time our mind is trying to play tricks on us. so that's why we come back to principle. That's why you come back to scripture. That's why you come back to the teachings, because they help keep you in check as you're also revealing that teaching within yourself, your own inner scripture, if you want to put it that way, right? Yeah, nice. You're welcome. I'm on Instagram. Go and rest. We did cover your question in the beginning, if you want to go back, if you came in late, right? So for those on Instagram, if you have other questions, yeah. So thanks, Hans. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, there's no one answer to things like that in particular, other than I do feel very resonant with the fact that we're keeping everything of a natural energy, right? Including if meat is in the picture. I think that's one thing that that line is best not to be crossed, right? And then the crossing of lines becomes more individual over time. Over time, you start to see what your natural boundary is in regards to what it is you're willing to put in your body, or what you feel like is actually necessary to put in your body, right? So yeah. But great question. Yeah, really great. And I've been more dogmatic on that in previous times, although I don't really see the need for myself to engage in that, certainly, anytime at this point. But it's not like completely out of the picture or anything. It's just that, yeah, like, I remember actually in the past 2 years, I've gone back to salmon a couple times, and almost immediately I'd start feeling a bit more emotional, almost, more primal as well. The sexual energy, or the primal instincts will activate. The sexual energy will be stronger. And this is actually something I wanted to talk about. So I'm finishing a post on this. It's been a long time experiment for me of just understanding the nature of sexual desire, sexual urges, in relation to food. And I've pretty much brought it back to from my own experience, and then, hearing it from others on the path as well. is that a large portion of our sexual urges are actually due to an inflamed colon and inflamed bladder. The inflammation that we have accreted in our colon from, the plaque and the buildup, and same in our bladder. We have plaque in our bladder. You understand, right? Like we do have plaque and stuff in our bladder. So let alone the fact that our intestinal tract is constantly working, constantly bulging. All three of these main organ systems are going to either push against the prostate in the male body, or just in general push against the sexual organs in both the female and the male bodies, right? So the core of this as a primary driver for sexual urge is very real. It's very much a in my view, it makes up for a large portion of sexual urges. Now, this comes from deeper roots. One deeper level root could be hormonal imbalances, right? If you're filled up with acid waste in your whole body from, again, the same things we've been talking about, well, then your hormones are going to be off. So females are going to feel this more strongly, but males will as well. And depending on the consumption, that will determine different forms of hormonal imbalances, right? In the adrenals and the thyroid and, all these areas. Obviously in the brain, the pituitary gland in specific has a lot of issues for a lot of people. So, so the hormones are going to be off. So hormones are obviously affecting sexual urges as well. Then if you go one step deeper, where is all this consumption driven from? Well, it's driven from a lack of true emotional intimacy with self, others, and God. So that emotional trauma, which is often a mix of sexual trauma in pretty much everybody. So that is the root to a lot of why we consume anyways. So we see that all the symptoms are interconnected. And so then we come to the layer understanding of our sexual urges, and we see that the majority of the sexual urges are actually trauma-based. They're consumption-based. They are damaged-based. They are coming from an inflamed body, from unprocessed emotions, and a lot of other things. So this starts to completely reformulate the viewing on sexual urges as a whole, because if you go any long period of fasting or long period where the consumption really does shift, primarily to say fruit or juice fasting, dry, you pretty much won't have any sexual urges. Like you could go like a full month or longer or whatever with like almost zero sexual urges or thoughts. So then, I mean, like, is that not a revelation? I mean, you guys are gonna have to experience this yourself, but I'm speaking from my own journey where, like all the confusion, all the topics of, romance and partnership and tantra and sexual energy and all the things, not just in the regular world. I mean, that's a whole other beast, but even in the spiritual space, it's still just this over dramatized and over theorized concepts that, because the majority of people that are speaking about it still haven't maybe engaged, what I'm speaking about here in regards to actually healing the inflamed colon and prostate for one, and the bulging of the bladder that's pushing against the sexual urges, let alone the other ways in which sexual urges are manifesting. So in my view, like a good 90% of all that conversation is just not necessarily rooted. It has partial truths, but it's not coming from an experiential space where there's been a long period of time where no real urges have come up. So it completely transforms the whole topic altogether. The conversation has changed, because now what we typically view to be sexual energy or sexual urges and sexual attraction, that very much will change. And it primarily changes within our own coming of purity and innocence, and the recognition that it's really just energy in movement. It's creative force in movement that wants to engage into expression and into fun and into play and into just like friendship and intimacy that has nothing to do with sexual urges, has nothing to do with the typical views of sexuality that we've come to know. So this is quite the topic, and it's very much interlinked with everything that we've already gone to in this course, and much of what I've shared often already. But this has been a more focused experiment the past year, 2 years for myself. Even just like literally last night, I was engaging the enema topic and understanding that, especially for the male body in particular, when you go through a period of fasting and then you go back into eating, when you go back into the eating and there's more like stuff to pass, obviously, from eating now, that's going to start very quickly creating the sexual urges, right? Because the prostate will be affected almost right away, right? The pushing against the prostate and the rest of the sexual organs. So females will feel this probably the same. I just haven't checked in with enough to see if that's what they're experiencing too. But for myself as a male body, that will happen almost immediately. So the quicker that we can remove the stuff out of the colon and intestinal tract, then basically you're catching those sexual urges before they go. And then if you're on a more celibate or semen retention path, then you will be able to circumvent the possibility of that relapsing, right? So it's like a whole other world of like life hacks, I guess, that I'm going to be presenting with that conversation. But essentially, the more stuff that's passing through your intestinal tract and colon, the more sexual urges you will have. That's pretty much what it comes down to. When it's not happening, you won't really have as much. And it's not to say you won't have a sexual attraction to somebody. It's just that it won't come with all the primal urges that it technically usually comes with. And it just won't be the same. And there's deeper levels of integration with that will transform even those urges on some level, so that the whole topic of sexuality changes already, like in a completely new way. But that I find has to do with all kinds of other layers, trauma and energies and different things like this. So we're not dismissing sexuality or sexual union or any of this at all. It's just that we're getting to a much more refined viewpoint on what that actually is. And it's far simpler, actually, because when you're in the depth of these pressured sexual glands that then force sexual urges all the time, you're pretty much sexually attracted to everybody all the time. Like anyone who holds any ounce of any sort of physical attraction, energetic attraction, it almost instantly is going to trigger those urges, because again, the body is inflamed, right? Like basically what I'm pointing at here is that we have to really start to differentiate between what is a bodily movement, like an energy, like the physical body is just working like a computer, right? So if the computer is not working and functionally in an optimal balanced state, it's going to work in a non-optimal balanced state. So we get into these kind of like deep theories and long stories and trends around things that are literally just responses of the body that are happening based on simple choice and consequence. It's not this big story. It's not this long drawn out thing about this person or about this situation, about that, about this. So much of that is just the mind trying to find answers to something it doesn't understand or it's missing. That was my point before. If we haven't really investigated what could be another root cause to what's happening, then you're just going to fall into these traps of these theories. They're just theories, stories that aren't true, but you think they are, because you don't really know what's going on. That's pretty much the whole COVID story, right? Like the whole world thinks that this thing is out to get them and is going to kill them, and that. It's like this gigantic theory that's not true. It has no basis on anything, right? And we live some, I mean, we can laugh at it because we've all lived this and we still live it. We all have our own stories and theories about things that we think are real, that when we really come to true knowledge, we see, oh, wait a minute, that was actually completely not the case. Like I literally was believing in a dream, thinking I'm a chicken wearing a chicken suit, like my old teacher Ramaji used to say all the time. So I think there's some yeah. So a sexual urge has a similar energy to me as hunger. Yeah. Sexual urge, hunger urge, as I've noticed. Yep. Totally. But yeah, I mean, that's it, right? And you'll find that this is also very interrelated with money too. Shopping and money and all that. Money is just another way that we tend to get in the way of intimacy. Obviously, there's practical elements to money. I'm not, there's practical elements to all of this, but money is another form where that imbalance can manifest, right? Because you could have these unnatural sexual urges for another physical being. You could also have unnatural, creative, money-driven desires around someone else. Like if you think of the typical energy of a salesman or a saleswoman, there is predominantly a seduction energy with that. The core of it is seduction, even in the most like honorable ways of sales, right? So it's not a bad thing. It's just we have to get more real with the authenticity. Like for many of us who are maybe entrepreneurs or those in the space of sharing, how can we share in a way that is of the most authentic space, that there can be exchanges of money, but we understand that it doesn't firstly always need to be that. But second, it's done in ever deepening spaces of integrity and balance, right? And of course, if we get to a place of full self-autonomy, breatharianism, where we don't need anything, then yeah, maybe everything we give is free. And I definitely have resonated with that at different times. And also there's times of practicality, which are different for all of us. So we don't want to get dogmatic with anything, but I totally see that piece. Hunger urge, sexual urge. Alexandra saying, I have had no libido in a very long time. I thought something was wrong with me. I'm married, so that isn't great. But yeah, oh boy, yeah. I mean, I've experienced this with partners too, going in different waves. And yeah, I mean, obviously, if you have a partner that's understanding, or if there's a level of intimacy that's developed that's not just based on physical or sexual elements, then that's great too. But also, again, that's part of the recalibration, because in the core of most advanced teachings of sexual tantra, sacred sexuality, sexual union, karedza, these forms like white tantra, these forms of sexual energy-based spiritual teachings, the majority of them are not really focused on physical sex, some at all. And others, if that's happening, it's happening in a very meditative way that is not at all like, certainly pornography culture, or much of maybe what we have all experienced in different ways. So that is a recalibration, and that requires, a certain looking at those teachings maybe, or just understanding them, where there can be movements of connection that are more meditative, more playful, even platonic on some level, that can still foster that same intimacy and love that's being sought out, right? So I have a really good course on that, though. It's called the Sacred Sex course on my platform. So, if you ever want to take a look at that. Lucky's very understanding and doesn't seem to mind. He's trying to follow my ways a bit too. Yeah, exactly, right? And in my experience, I mean, I've had some of the most amazing experiences in this regard with clothes on, right? In a meditation of a certain sort. So yeah, we won't get into all that too much, but yeah, there's a whole new world that opens up in every respect of our lives. And I wanted to touch on this topic because it's one of the most primary distractors on the path, right? Partnership, sexuality, romance, the desire for companionship. These things are going to be reformulating when we are focusing on the most fundamental way that we engage in this world, which is with our food, and what goes on in our organ system and in our body, right? And so healing the whole body starts to reformulate everything. And yeah, it's a profound topic. So thanks for listening to me on that. I'll have a post on that coming soon. I've been working on it for a little bit of time, because there is most definitely a hypersexuality in our culture, right? And that hypersexuality is driven by the unconsciousness to what's going on in our body, pretty much. So if we start to take a look at that, then we can find balance. Okay. All right, I've been talking a lot, as per usual, these calls. Just gonna, so yeah, if there's other questions, put in the chat. I'm just gonna check, because there was a couple other ones I'm gonna address. Oh yeah, urine therapy. We're gonna talk about that. Well, we might as well just get in. Another juicy subject. Urine therapy. Well, we didn't talk about that too much in this course. Oh, 1 second. I'm just gonna link. Someone just messaged me for the link. Hopefully I'm not too late, so they can join in on the Zoom. Yeah, so urine therapy. Okay, well, this is becoming more of a trendy topic, especially in the detox space. I mean, you have guys with full, Instagram pages all about urine therapy, all this. And, you know, it's become kind of a, I would say a bit of an overhyped topic a little bit, like most things do. Like trends usually go in a certain path where they peak really quickly and then they come back and then they kind of find a balance, similar to like a crypto chart. You know, if you're ever into crypto trading, the crypto world, it's funny when you actually watch charts and stuff, you know, it's all based on emotion, right? And it follows the same pattern. Like you can actually start to see the fractal of those patterns in anything. Everything will carry those same patterns. So I found that really cool. But when it comes to trends, trends will always carry that pattern. They'll get really hyped and then they'll calm down and then they'll calm down. And that's obviously a product of the people who are part of sharing those trends, where they go through their own emotional waves and then it bounces up. So that's kind of what I'm seeing with the urine therapy topic, right? It's a topic that was kind of suppressed or not talked about for a very long time. And now it's being talked about a lot, and at least in my space. I mean, probably not in the mainstream, obviously, but I've actually in the mainstream, I've seen some articles of friends I know that were, you know, getting in mainstream articles about drinking their pee. And yeah, so certainly, I mean, urine therapy has a lot of warrants in regards to healing benefits. It's been in every ancient culture for a long time. You know, in the yogic culture, it was called Shivambu, the water of Shiva. It's also talked about in the Bible in cryptic form, like the fountain of youth from within, your own waters, drinking of your own waters. But there's a couple of misconceptions here, and there is a couple caveats with this, right? So let's take a look at them. Firstly, urine is filtered blood. It is not just filtered toxic waste or filtering what you're drinking. It is partly, that's mainly happening in your pancreas. Actually, what's happening mainly in your kidneys is the filtration of your blood. So the scientific term of urine is plasma ultrafiltrate, right? Plasma being blood. It's the filtered blood, the distilled filtered blood. That's why when you actually look at urine, it has like a silkiness to it. It's not just a liquid, it's a silkiness that's very similar to how blood is. So the premise behind urine therapy is essentially this. It clicked for me a year or two ago when I had already kind of heard the idea from breatharian community that we have our own inner pharmacy, that anything we possibly could need, and ever will need, is possible in being created inside a harmonious body, a body that has activated that ability again, which may or may not be possible in this lifetime, but let's say it is. So we have this inner pharmacy, right? And our body has an ability to be its inner pharmacy by producing what it needs, right? To sustain itself perpetually, like a sun. So that was always kind of in my framework. Then when I came into urine therapy and I heard about the blood and all this, and the fact that there's actually a very long list of enzymes, bacterias, nutrients, vitamins, minerals, like a very long list that has been tested by science, you know, whatever that means, to show that that's actually what's in urine in very small trace quantities. So this reminds me of my experience with homeopathy, right? When you take the original pharmaceuticals are homeopathic remedies that were suppressed and were literally wiped from the educational system when Rockefeller came in and took over the university system, primarily the health-based university system, to basically turn doctors into pharmaceutical salesmen. That's mainly what they are, right? There are great doctors out there, but mainly their education in the traditional forms of school is pharmaceuticals, right? Not nutrition. They do very few courses in nutrition, pharmaceuticals, right? So they became the salesmen of the new homeopathy, which is the pharmaceutical world. But homeopathy is basically taking trace amounts of something and putting it into your body so your body can create what it needs to deal with that, right? So it's, again, coming back to the information. If we can understand information, we understand that when we take even the smallest quantity of something, it doesn't matter how small it is physically, it's still information. It's like a thought. How much can a negative thought completely ruin our world, right? It's information. So homeopathy works with information. Same with the topic of vibrational essences or flower essences, right? These are vibrational remedies because they hold information. So when we consume them, we're consuming that information and our body starts to create it based on that. It takes that information and starts to work its own pharmacy with that, right? Herbs can do this kind of on some level, right? But so what would it mean then, where your body is excreting a mix of all these enzymes and bacteria and vitamins and toxins? Yes, there is toxins in your urine, right? And especially if you're a very toxic body, it's going to be secreting acid waste, the crystals of acid waste. But it also could hold the crystals of DMT and stem cells and all kinds of other stuff in there. So if you're excreting this, then your body is literally just giving you its own blood test. It's just giving you its own blood test. So if you were to take even just a drop of that, you are taking in your own blood test, your own homeopathic remedy, your own vaccine. Is that not what the premise of vaccination is? The premise of vaccination is homeopathic based. It's taking something in nature, something that potentially is a threat or a toxin or something, putting it in your body so that your body can create and be stronger to deal with whatever that is. So when you consume, a good example of this is how animals actually lick themselves. Animals are constantly licking themselves. They're literally taking in their own V, their own homeopathic remedy, because they're licking themselves of themselves clean, and then they're swallowing it. So when we consume and we take even just one drop, that can act, in my view, as a homeopathic activation. Now, to see the benefits of that or whatever, I mean, that could be different for each person, and I'm not claiming things. I mean, whatever, we're all beyond that at this point. It's an experimentation that we would have to engage. But to me, that is the best way to actually initiate the process of using that. And you could potentially never go beyond that. But I think that is actually a beautiful way to understand how your body works and the intimacy with your body. What's more intimate than consuming the liquids that come out of the same tube as the sacred fluid that both the male and female has? You would not excrete something that is of death, like exclusive death, that would come out the same passageway as what is this most sacred fluid in your body. It would not happen that way. However, this is the caveat, right? If we've been existing in a very toxic body, then yes, there will be toxins in what's being excreted. So when people are just claiming this idea, like you can just drink it at any time, you just drink it all, whatever, and people are doing that, well, firstly, you're not going to die. People do it all the time and do it for years. And the majority of people that I've seen doing urine therapy are healthier than 95%, 99% of the population. So it's definitely not like a complete toxic waste going to kill you type thing. That's one thing. But in my view, it would be better to consume it after periods of detoxification have occurred, because the detoxification is cleansing out all layers of your toxicity, obviously. So you're not going to be excreting. Now, what are you excreting then? You're excreting your blood, the vitamins, minerals, enzymes, DMT crystals, all of that in very, very small quantities. Don't think you're going to be going on no trip with it. With that said, though, so another element with the urine therapy is aged urine. Aged urine has actually been one of those grandmother remedies in different cultures, right? Where if you have aged urine around, you keep that, because it's one of the only substances that gets better over time. It doesn't get worse. It gets better, more stronger, more potent over time, because stem cells starts to create within the substance. So that actually can be used. I used it when I broke my ankle like months ago in the summer. I would soak it in that aged urine almost every day. And that's actually used by athletes and different things over time. Obviously, we often aren't keeping our urine, so usually just using it fresh. But again, when you're thinking about the idea of your body is going through this process of its own blood test, its own almost like homeopathic creation every day, then even when you're in a sick state, you're consuming even just a little bit is an activation on some level, because whatever you're sick with, you are creating what you need to heal from within. So that creates the cycle. Now, I'll tell a story about this idea of the real purification powers that come when there is like true cleansing that's occurred, right? So a lot of people who are into urine therapy have heard about this from Dr. Sebi. Dr. Sebi is in the African community, and he's pretty big in the Black community in general as like a real master healer. Obviously, he's passed now, but his teachings are eternal. And he had this main healing experience where he went, I think, 90 days on mainly liquids, no, only liquids, but mainly like teas and certain juices. And then I think he went a month. I think it overlapped in that 90 days, a month on only coconut water. Then he went into the urine. This is after 90 days of liquid cleansing, okay? And then he went into the urine. And when he was going into that, he went blind. So I think it was 9 days, 5 to 9 days or something on urine, where at a certain point he went blind. And he went blind for 5 days, right? Drinking, only learned. So we call this looping. We're looping the urine. So you're only drinking your own distilled liquid, and it keeps getting distilled again and again. Your body is the best distiller, the best machine, the distiller machine. So he's only looping this. And after 5 days of being blind, his eyesight came back, and it was like beyond 20/20. Before it was quite shit. And so what was his theory? His theory was that the urine was literally helping him cleanse out and pull out the toxic waste from his brain. So when it was going down, it was literally like causing issues in his eyes, making him blind. Can you imagine that, right? And we covered this in session 4, the different types of detox symptoms, right? So so there you go. So that's a good example of what the possibilities and potential is. But that's coming from deep level cleansing. So I'm not really a huge advocate on those who are still eating not the best diets to be doing it, mainly because you could, if you want to, I would just do the drops. You can drink a bit. I mean, the best is the fresh in the morning after you let it go a little bit. So the initial toxins come out, and then you're midstream, you're taking a little bit of that. And that's going to be the most nourishing, unless you have aged urine that can again, we're using caution here too. Not that it's dangerous, but you're drinking something that's like I'm drinking aged urine that's over a year old, and it's like pure electricity, literally pure electricity. It's like you're drinking electricity. That's what it felt like. I've never experienced anything like it, to be honest, from a liquid. And even that, it's not like a psychedelic, but it's profound. So I'm not dogmatic on this or like overhyping it in any way. I think to me, it is certainly the golden fountain of youth from within. Now, understand this: when you get into a true state of regeneration, you won't actually urinate. Your body will consume its own urine from the inside, and that is in my way the true urine therapy. So we get there through I don't know, I'm not there yet, but that would be dry fasting and more of an advanced path. But so I'm quite balanced with this, right? Like the people that just drink it and guzzle it all the time, to me that's unnecessary, because there are some toxins in it and it's just unnecessary. However, it's going to be better than a lot of liquids you could find in the world. That's the funny thing. 95% of the liquids we could buy are not as good as our own liquids. So that's one thing. The other thing is that other people have the argument that if you drink it at any time, well, you're going to know how bad you're eating, because it's going to taste like shit, and it will. Right, really salty or this, so you won't want to drink it, right? So it's like a self-testing mechanism. When you're eating clean, it's going to taste great, and when you're on liquids, it's going to taste like the liquids you're drinking a lot of time, coconut water. So I'm pretty balanced with that view. I don't view it as this like it's not. To me, again, the natural state is the purest. Dry fasting will heal you faster than anything. It will heal everything and anything. It's just that you don't want to push that, because if you're not ready, then it could cause more damage. So like anything, we have to be balanced in our approach. But with that said, like a very close, like, again, what are we after? When we're consuming, we're after the distilled waters. Distilled waters, the true internal fountain of liquid water within you, drinking from your own water, in my view, is the dry fast, because we are going to be drinking the liquid, the water, the structured distilled water that is broken down by the cells that are being cannibalized. That's the most sacred water we could find in the universe. It's in our own body. Secondary to that, would be, yeah, the distilled water of the what's coming out of the urine, right? In my view, the best is just using as a homeopathic remedy initially. I mean, you can drink it too. Someone was asking about getting rid of a scar. Getting rid of a scar with aged urine. I haven't done it. I'm sure it's possible. Scars are, the thing with scars is, look at healing this way. Your body is going to prioritize what's most important. Where do you think a scar is on that list? Right? It's not that high. So yeah, if you're topically putting aged urine on the scar every day, I definitely think you'd see some benefits. I actually, one of the only product I'll put on my face in regards to acne, or in regards to like any sort of blemish, which I don't really get much, and if I do, it's gone generally within the day, because it's just a product of a detox, like something, too much nuts or something like this. But if it does happen and I want to use something, I will use aged urine, and it absolutely works. It absolutely works. So, that to me, that's one of the most, like, yeah, like, think about the industry of acne creams, pimple creams, blemish creams, all of it. Think about that. Think about the the amount of money in that space, when in truth, you could literally just pee in a cup and put it on your face, and it'll work better than pretty much all of that, because I've used so much of that in my life, from especially my teenage years, right? So I would try that. I have a little bottle. I have aged urine that's been aging for a year, and anything that I ever get, I will put that on almost immediately. And again, the body will already be in an efficient state of healing. So you could say, oh, it's maybe that, or it's a bit of the age or whatever, but maybe it's a placebo, I don't know. But to me, like, I mean, I definitely have seen a difference with that. So yeah, sure, it could work on a scar, right? But when we come back to the drive, the thing with the overhyped about the urine, I mean, I say that, but I'm being a bit critical, in the sense that, like, fuck, I mean, how many other things would be overhyped in this world that are just absolutely useless? So if we're a bit overhyped on the urine, I mean, like, I guess I gotta be compassionate with that, because in truth, it is a wonderful tool. It's a wonderful tool, but I think it needs to be done in balance. I don't think just chugging it all the time at any time is a good idea. But again, like, if you're replacing alcohol instead, like, it's probably better. So it's a funny paradox. But I mean, there's so many books. Just go look up urine therapy books. I have a really good link. I'll link that in every one in the detox program. I have a really good PDF, well, not a PDF, but it's a website that breaks down the science about it, because it's not just like in the old yogic time, they were very dramatic on the effects. They were very dramatic on the effects, like, to the degree of it, like, mind-blowing what they were saying, what the yogis were saying, that it's possible to accomplish if you were consistently drinking the urine over a period of time. And I actually haven't been that consistent, so I can't really speak to that, right? I definitely do feel it has is amazing. I just also see the overhyped nature, mainly because of the dry fasting experience, right? Because I've had the dry fasting experience, and I've seen the, like, life-changing benefits of reversing things that literally, like, I was thinking about my ankle. My ankle's probably about 95% now, after being broken this summer. Never went to the doctor, never did any of that shit. I have, like, my dad, who's literally had almost the same injury. He's had the same pain for 50 years or 40 years, whatever amount of time since he did it when he was younger, right? So just the 10 days dry fast, like, almost completely gone. So to me, like, everything that ideas about consumption, this, consumption, that, like, a lot of it is kind of nullified when we're going into the natural state more consistently, right? So, but we use the tools, and I think it's a great tool. That's what I gotta say about it. Oh, someone's asking about the sediment in the urine. Yeah, that's a question, right? I mean, I'm still not so sold on the idea that drinking it is such a terrible idea, even if you have sediment. But I rather, and the stuff that I've been aging for years was during a coconut water or some sort of juice fast. So it was very clear, very clean. I liked it, So you got to use your intuition. I mean, this is very much an intuition thing. And to be honest, I don't think it's ever necessarily a bad idea to do the homeopathic route. where you're just either taking drops or you actually go through the process of making the homeopathic remedy, which is very easy. Go on YouTube. What is the better enema? So yeah, you're coming a bit late, Natalia. So you can go and rewatch it. I talked about enemas, but someone's asking about the urine. I've done urine enemas. Yeah, I think they're great. And I've also, I really just like the warm lemon water. I think that's just so simple. It's so accessible. Maybe put a bit of baking soda. To me, that's great. What about wrinkles on your face? I mean, yeah, maybe. Remember, the healing is not necessarily coming from anything external. So the healing is primarily coming from the fasting. So that these tools can potentially help, but again, your body's going to prioritize what energy it wants to put where it wants to put that energy for healing. So in my view, like a lot of the more cosmetic things, those are going to be last on the list. They're going to happen either way. I mean, my skin has gotten great, but okay, I still have wrinkles there. So what's that? You know what I mean? My hair is great, but sometimes I still lose hair. You know, my nails kind of long right now, but I was letting them regrow after the dry, you know, in like complete form. But they're almost like completely bare in regards to any sort of markings or anything. So these things sure can happen. The cosmetic aspects, of course, you're gonna look better when the insides look good, but it's gonna go in a flow of priority. Right, and your organs are priority, your muscles, your ligaments, your joints, your blood, your lymph, your eyesight, you know, your nervous system, your hormones, that's priority. Right, but try it. I mean, try it. Some other questions here. I've got something really good for scars. Well, it's on our Instagram page, that's why you're not seeing it. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what that what the scar thing is. I know vitamin E, aloe vera can be quite nice too, you know, but I tried. I mean, I don't think there's any limitations with the aged urine in my view. I haven't tried on all these things, so I don't know, but I've seen stories about all kinds of stuff. And I just know for myself, like it's the best skin product I've ever used. But I don't use it much, so yeah. Skin cancer, yeah, I mean you could potentially use for that. But what's skin cancer? Skin cancer is just blocked up lymph. It's blocked up. Remember, the skin is like the third kidney, right? So when we're in the acid state, our third kidney is blocked up. We're not able to release things as easy, right? Some people will have trouble even sweating and things like that, right? Because things are blocked up, and the lymph is also there. One interesting story about the skin and about the lymph, because the lymph, when it's not moving, it's right under the skin. It becomes like a swamp. It's like a swamp, right? So interesting story I had was in the summer where I was getting like demolished because I was eating more cooked and stuff. And, you know, I mean, diet was still pretty good, but I also have, I think, the blood type that really attracts the mosquitoes. And then also there's still a lot of fruit. So there's a lot of sugars being sweated out too. So there's a whole mix. So I was just getting like real, like, I mean, we were in a pretty dense forest, but the mosquitoes were just going off. And then I went through periods where I went there to that same area and I was dry fasting. You know, I was on day 2 or 3, I was in a regular cycle, and I wasn't really experiencing much, similar to the allergies, how allergies will stop. I also wasn't experiencing as much of the mosquito biting because where they're going after the swamp. Yeah, they want the blood. So you could have a blood type that may attract them more, but they also are attracted to the swamp that's living in your lymph, right? So skin cancers and all the different forms of skin issues, the rashes, the acne, the pimples, the warts, the moles, the sunspots, that's all lymph. That's all buildup in the skin and the lymph, right? So that's where we gotta, things like dry brushing, right? Dry brushing can be nice, right? Like just even like patting the body, you know, every day, like going through the body, getting the skin going. But the dry brushing, I don't do it that much, but the dry brushing could be nice. Get a dry brush, and you can just even get a piece of soft wood and just really get into your body. You know, you can even so it gets kind of red, but you're breaking up that lymph and that stagnant fascia and everything that's in the skin. And that starts helping the skin move and the kidneys, the third kidney move more. So yeah, that's what I would say about that. Because all the any sort of skin issue, including skin cancer, is just coming from that same core origin. Skin has to move. It wants to. The lymph has to move. If it's stagnant, then yeah, you're gonna have those issues. So yeah. So yeah, I mean, well, we've been really going hour and a half now. I mean, I don't need to stop. If there's more questions, I don't think I have anything else from my notes from people asking. We've covered everything. That I think so. So I'll just kind of sit here and see if anything else comes. For those on Instagram, just know that, yeah, I'm talking to pretty much everyone on my Zoom that we were doing a detox program the past 3 weeks. You can get the recordings now. If you go on the link that I posted or on my Instagram, I would highly recommend it because a lot of the questions are going to be answered in that and many more. And the breakdown on the 9-day colon cleanse is there. So you can go through that process, which can be done many times. I would encourage it actually many times. Going until you don't poop anymore. Boy, it'll take a while, as we've identified. So yeah, if there's other questions, then holla at your boy. Just double checking on my page. Yeah, and then we'll just get into because I made a nice post on Instagram. If everyone wants to go read that on processing grief, I think that could be applicable to any emotion. But I got a couple of questions this week. People having loved ones pass or their animal pass, and so sad. And so I shared as best I could about this topic of emotion and dealing with grief, which I think is the most humbling of emotions, but this is all of the above, right? And you'll see in the post, I would just really encourage everyone to go read that because this is the premise. Like I'm getting these questions right before we're about to go into level 2, which is the core premise of level 2, which is how to engage shadow work, emotional trauma, emotional processing, the whole shebang when it comes to that, because that's really what we're dealing with when it comes to consumption. We're dealing with how is energy in a perpetual state of motion. And the core symptom, I think, is actually identified in the question that was asked by basically both of these individuals, which is a common question. I'm not judging it. It's actually, of course, like it's the question of how do I deal with this emotion? What technique, what can I use, right? What process can I engage right now to deal with this? And in my view, that's actually that questioning or that approach is actually what perpetuates the core of the challenges with emotion, is because we're trying to treat our emotions as if they're static things that we can manipulate and control. Right. So yes, there are methods and techniques that we can become more adept at riding the wave more specifically. And most specifically, I think, is not treating parts of ourselves as things that we are there to control or things that we're there to manipulate. Rather, trusting in the intelligence of and how our body and the language of our body, how it speaks to us. Right. Because when we think, oh, I got to process this grief or this emotion, even just that is illusionary, because emotion is not a one static thing. It's not like only this emotion is now present. It's just grief. And it's like this binary thing. Not at all. Like when you really go into explore an emotion, it's like when that typical term, it's like all the feels, all the feels. What does that mean? It's all of the above. We literally could be experiencing sadness and joy, sorrow and excitement, love and compassion and grief and shame, all at the same time. And the only difference, in my experience, the only difference between someone who has realized the nature of themselves in any fashion and someone who hasn't, or someone who's in the depth of their own shit, like under the water, the only difference is someone who has come to accept that fact that you literally can experience everything at the same time and it's all okay. Because being okay with one means that you're okay with the other. If you're okay with the grief, it means joy is instantly going to be revealed. Like, I don't know how many times this past year I've just bawled my eyes out in the most beautiful way. I'm literally experiencing sadness and joy and fucking everything at the same time. And it's literally the most blissful thing. You can't even describe it really. Like there's nothing to describe it. There's no identification of any particular emotion. It's like all of them at the same time, right? So this is the premise of what we're going at in the next course, and the link is going to be up. What is up? Some of you already registered, which is great. I appreciate that willingness, because yeah, it's quite the topic. I mean, it's like I mean, it doesn't matter how far we go on the path. It's going to be an attempt of the unintegrated mind to avoid that whole experience, because I mean, when were we ever really taught this, you know? Like that is, and it's not something that even can be fully taught. Like I can't fully teach you this, you know, like it can only be experienced. And especially grief. I mean, like there's nothing you can do. Like there's nothing you can run from, or, you know, you just have to literally be with it all, be it all. Right. So how do we set the context for that then, you know, and set the stage, and also create the environment. That's the practice, the techniques, the practices, the tools. We're creating the environment so that things can thrive. But it's like when we grow a flower, we're creating the environment, but we're not the one like forcing the growth of the flower. You can't. How are you gonna do that? You know, it doesn't work that way. So, so yeah. So question here, did you have elaborate dreams during your fast? Did you have elaborate dreams during your dry fast? As in, did you have better downloads? Well, I kind of have that all the time, to be quite honest. And there's actually different flavors of things that exchange and manifest. If we come back to the information thing, you could have, like, if you go from there's periods where you could go from a fasted space where there's actually no dreams, and there's not many, or there's not no dreams, it's just there's less dreams, or you're waking up and staying awake before the core window of REM, where most dreams happen between 4 a.m. and when you like 8, 9 a.m., whatever, right? That's why a lot of the yogis would never sleep beyond that, because they were like almost like anti-dream. Like the yogis are like not shamanic at all, you know, like they're like, we don't want to dream. We're not interested in that. We're going to beyond all of it, right? So that we can come to know the absolute truth. And it's very valid. So when you're in a dry fasting state, like the last 3 days of my 10-day, I woke up every day either at 4 or 3 a.m. So there wasn't many dreams. I mean, yeah, there's dreams, but it's not like those morning hours where you literally want to go fucking back to bed to go back into the adventure, into the movie. Like I'll do that often, and it's fun because I've played the routes of both the shamanic path, you know, or the tantric path and the yogic path, monk path. So so that can be fun. But what you'll notice is, yeah, you're just going to wake up. So it's just inevitable you're not going to dream. Makes sense, right? Now, if you're eating more, think about it 2 ways. First, information. So you're eating all this information, you're going to be processing that information. So that will happen in the dream, and the dreams will be more crazy, more like weird, all over the place. And if you eat something really off, that could create more not as fun dreams. I've experienced, right? But it definitely spices things up, right? And it really makes things quite pronounced, because also there's other elements to this. Another element is you were going to sleep deeper because you're more tired, you're heavier, so you're going to get actually a deeper sleep, versus sometimes when you're very light, you may just keep waking up, so you're never really getting as much into those deep sleeps. So that's another thing. Third thing is you're obviously sleeping later into the morning, so that's where the REM is going to be very strong, and you're going to dream more pronouncedly, right? So it's not like, we got to just actually take a look at, like, well, what is a dream, right? What is a dream? We are going into the astral realm, and in that astral realm, our fears and desires are going to be both more pronounced. As those dreams and fears are more balanced or neutralized, then the dreams will not have a charge. So a couple things can happen. One thing is, yes, you have a more clear line to the higher self. So you may experience, firstly, actually in that space, dreams won't be as interesting to you, because you won't really care to go into something you're not like consciously participating in and controlling. You'll be more interested in astral travel, lucid dream, conscious journeying, and meditation. This was my post yesterday. Go on Instagram. about my topic about being able to activate journeying on command, because you are literally traversing through the universe when you're doing that, and you could go to places and go to parts of yourself within time. So you actually want to be conscious when you're doing that. It's better, right? When you're in the depth of your own kind of like delusion, or your walking life is not as exciting, you're kind of bored, you're not moving your creative energy, you'll want to dream longer because it'll be more exciting than your walking life. It'll play out itself in a more beautiful, expansive, blah, blah, blah way, right? And that's also then where healing can occur as well, right? Because you're in the astral plane, you are going to go through healings of different versions and aspects of yourself, because you're tapping into those aspects of self that you may not already be tapped into here. But if you are tapped into those realms here, then you may not necessarily feel the need that has to happen in the dream, because it's already happened. If you're living your life to the fullest here, the dreams will balance out and they will become basically just continuations of this lifetime. Like, I don't know how many times I can count about like everything that I did in the day, or I'm going to do the next day, or things I'm thinking about. I'm literally doing the exact same thing in the dream. There's basically no difference, because you've cleaned the slate has neutralized. You've cleaned much of the slate, right? That is the premise behind the dry fasting or the sleep deprivation, not even sleep deprivation, just sleep not happening, because you're living it. Right. So, but there's many levels to this. So again, I'm basically trying to share all the levels. And so you each could pick the one that feels whatever most aligned with you're not picking it. You're just aligned with the one that makes most sense to you right now. And it's an experimentation, obviously. Right. But I will say, after the dry fast, the 10 days, the first 2 days that I broke it, I had wild journey. Like, an hour, 2 hours, full psychedelic journeys. And I've been drawing some of the stuff I've been seeing. I write it all. I mean, most of the stuff I write often is things I'm translating in those experiences. So yeah, dry fasting 100% can do that. The short answer to the question, but I wanted to like really break down the dream topic. That's a really interesting topic to me. Next question, is microdosing okay during the juice or water fast? I'm assuming microdosing of like mushrooms or something like that. I mean, do what you want. I don't recommend it. It's not part of my protocol or anything. I would recommend, no, but I mean, people can do it. People see benefits, yeah, at this point with the psychedelics, I'm just like, do what you want, reap the consequences. I've shared a lot about the topic. I'm finishing a small ebook about it, which is basically just summarized of a lot of my Instagram posts and videos. I've been pretty clear about my perspective on it. So you can go and look at some of those past views. But I'm pretty balanced now. I mean, I still view them as doorways for some people. Sometimes there's healing. Sometimes there's things that happen that are nice. It's just that it's not something I like recommend or something that I'm like pointing people to. So yeah, and there's reason for that, obviously, right? If I thought it was really that beneficial, I'd point people. I believe that remembering who you are truly helps a whole lot with grief, since you understand that it's just a cycle. I agree. That's really nice. Yeah. So I mean, we just went into another tangent. I mean, I feel like we could probably go for a long time, but don't feel like, bad or anything about needing to leave or wanting to leave or fed up with my talking. But this is not a meditation session, it's a Q&A. So that's why we're going on this track. But yeah, I'm happy I did this live on the Awaken Kitchen Instagram. Yeah, I don't think, let's see. There was only one other topic that I had listed here that I didn't talk about. I guess, yeah, watching emotional waves, being mindful with the whole process. I mean, I think this ties into like what we started with today about just like observing the nature of detox symptoms and the cycles you're going to go through and the emotions that come with that, right? It's very easy to get into the game of justification and, trying to draw conclusions on things when we're in emotional places. Like even I've been more cognizant with myself, even like in doing any sort of longer fast, where attempting to always, or not always, but attempting to, as often as I can, break any particular fast when I feel balanced, not when I'm in a place of a dire, obviously there's a dire state that's potentially dangerous. That's quite rare. But there's also the space where you're just in the shit of your detox symptoms, it's not feeling so good. You're feeling a bit whatever. That's usually the easiest place to break a fast, but that's often I don't know, not the most productive space to break a fast, because that's actually when you're healing the most, right? That's when the most stuff is coming up. So that's not really the time to be drawing conclusions on things or trying to find answers and analyze things and try and figure out what's going on. Again, there's certain safety mechanisms we can use to see if things are getting dangerous, which again, very rare. And it's only really a conversation in the dry fast. If anything, it's more of a product of, well, how are we going to break that fast then? Like we got to make sure that that's happening in a more balanced way. So it's always, so I've been I think this only happens through maturity, where as there's a practicing over time, we start to realize, like in life in general, giving up when it's hard is often 3 feet before gold, right? Because the next cycle of a more balance after you've gone through that healing is generally going to feel really good. That's the goal. And then you may go through the next cycle, right? So maybe finding that middle space where you feel a bit more balanced, that's the space where a decision can be made, right? That's a space where we can come to a bit more clarity on what's actually going on. And sometimes that can take months and years to really come to clarity on what's going on with your healing, depending on where you're at, right? So drawing conclusions on this process or this approach or this technique after maybe only a week doing it, or sometimes there's alarm bells that your mind your consciousness will say, no, this is not for you, or this. But like we said, if we're dealing with things that have proven track records, generally that's not as much the case. And when we're talking about proven track records, we're talking about things over the long term, right? You got a lot of new diets and keto diet and this diet and that, and yeah, they have some very short-term versions of benefit, mainly physical, weight loss, a bit more energy, that kind of thing. But if we're dealing with deep healing, we're gonna have to go back in time. We're gonna have to really go and look at things that have been around, for quite a while, right? So yeah. Where can I find more detailed info on plant medicines? Go on my page, go on my Instagram, scroll down, honest look at plant medicine, you'll see it. It's a very quite a lot of interaction on that post. It's quite a few. Go through my Instagram. It's quite a few. But that ebook will be released at some point. Okay, more comments. Have a pattern of being way too hard on yourself. I try not to do that when I feel I'm pushing too hard, but how to truly know if it's that or actually giving up too soon. Okay, well, let's dissect this. Pattern on being too hard on myself. I try not to do that when I'm feeling pushing too hard. Yeah, so being hard on yourself can manifest generally on both extremes and in both polarities, right? So on one polarity, it manifests as, let me push forward. And then on the other side, let me resist what's happened, right? It's like this ping pong. So both have to be addressed, and they are addressed simultaneously in a certain sense, right? Where if we just come back to the simplicity of accepting what is, so everything that you ever hear me share, or any teacher or any system or any protocol or anything, okay, you have the information. Some of it you'll remember, some of it you won't, blah, 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 but you've got the information. Now that information circulates within you. And as you go about your practicing, as you go about your approaches, as you go about your life, you're going to have a sense based on that information of what you feel is correct or not. You're never going to know 100%, but you're going to have a sense. And so that basic sense is a part of the guidepost, and that's mixing with your natural intuition. But what it's filtered through is traumas and hyped emotion and, maybe nervous system that's a bit off, like weird relationship with pain. There's all these different filters that are very strong energies. They're very strong like conditionings of the computer of this body. So even though you have this information that says, okay, Corey said this, or I read this and it said maybe I should go this long, or maybe I should keep doing blah blah, you're gonna keep going to that and you're like, okay, I'm good, we're working with it, I'm gonna apply this. But then it could just happen where your body's like, no, you're done, boom, you break the fast, or no, you're done, and you go and do some habit, or no, you're in a relationship and you say something stupid or whatever. So the mechanism of the trauma, the mechanism of the body is just going to happen, and it's going to essentially blindsides you. Like, we've all experienced this. So what to do then, right? Like, it doesn't matter all the knowledge that you have. It doesn't matter what you've learned. It doesn't matter those things. It's happened. It's already happened. So if we do not use that opportunity as a space to just simply accept the fact of the matter, the reality of the situation, not what the fantasies of the mind want it to be, but the fact that this has just happened. I've just done exactly what it is I know that deep down I maybe don't really want to do, or I've learned that is not the best thing or whatever, but it's happened. I've done it. So, okay, what's the actual issue? There is no issue, because it doesn't matter what you think about it. It doesn't matter what you thought could have happened. It doesn't matter what you think should have happened. It's happened. And it's gone now. It's completely gone. It's happened. So the only thing that can be done in this space, truly the only thing that can be done, is awareness, is the observance, the willingness to be with exactly now the consequence that you're going to face. That is the way that we dissolve the mechanism of the ping pong that we identified at the beginning, right? Because you don't care whether you do it right or wrong. Your sense of worthiness, your sense of well-being, your sense of you being God is not dependent on the choices of this or that. You're already that. You already have always been that. So it doesn't matter. Everything that the ego thinks is, if I do this, I get closer. If I do that, I get farther away. If I do this, I get closer. If I do this, I get farther away. I'm a good boy. I'm a bad boy. I'm a good girl. I'm a bad girl. It's just constant that. But none of that actually even matters, because you're already this perfection and this God. So if that is actually the perception that you carry, like, think about that. If that is the filter you're viewing everything through, then only healing can happen. Only dissolving of karmic imprints can happen. Only a balancing of this computer can happen. Only that can happen. That's the inevitable conclusion, in whatever period of time. So the most paradoxically counterintuitive approach to all of this, meaning literally giving up this intense need to always feel like you got to control it all, is actually the doorway to healing. As the primary, prior to all of the knowledge about fasting and protocols and systems and approaches, what's right, what's wrong, what's the good way, what's the bad way. That's the primary way healing occurs. So if we're in that place of acceptance while simultaneously applying the knowledge we're learning consistently, like perpetually with effort, that's the effort, because the mind requires effort to rewire. It needs the effort. You cannot rewire this computer without effort. So that's the knowledge, that's the engagement, that's the practice, that's the discipline. And the compassion, which everything rests on, is this knowing that it doesn't matter what happens either way, because you're going to get right up and you're going to do the same thing again. You're going to get right up and you're going to do the same thing again. And you don't need to push, because if you're not resisting the pain that you're already in, you're not going to push forward to some imaginary destination that doesn't give you anything anyways. Right? Run that back. Right? If you're not resisting what is, you're not going to push forward to the imaginary golden pot at the end of the rainbow. That's all that ever is happening in the seeking personal development process, where we think we need to keep pushing. What are we pushing? We're running from something. We're running from the inevitable pain that's coming to us when we keep pushing, and then we're exhausted, and then we get shot back. And then we repeat the cycle again. So it has to be addressed on both ends, and it will be. And then as it's addressed over time, like this, it starts getting less pronounced, right? Less pronounced, less pronounced, less pronounced. This is the oscillation of higher oscillation, higher frequency. It's going at such a fast rate, it doesn't even look still. Versus lower oscillation, no real progress. You ain't going nowhere. You're not progressing, or you're progressing at such a whatever rate, but that's fine too, right? But as it gets right here, so that's when we're addressing both sides. We're addressing both sides. So I hope that makes sense. That was a long-winded way of explaining it, but that's extremely profound. I mean, pretty much if we end there, we'll be good. So yeah, okay. I feel good with that. I mean, that's a good way to end, in my view. I mean, it all comes back to that anyways. True self-acceptance, true acceptance of what is, as it is. What's the big deal? Just repeat that. What's the big deal? Oh, I just broke the fast. What's the big deal? I got eternity anyways. What's the big deal? No? That's it. I mean, a lot of times it's like we're little kids again. We do things that we know are bad just because our parents say are bad. So if we're so attached to only this idea of what's good, what's bad, then we'll just continue that cycle, right? But if there's no real charge, then you're gonna be like, well, all right, you got to experience. Cool. Okay. Well, yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. I will put the link for level 2. We'll want to keep going. I mean, the Telegram group is going to be open either way for everyone, but those who want to continue, I had planned next week, but I think we may move it back even one more week. But maybe we'll start next week. I don't know. I'll keep everyone updated. That's going to be profound. We're going to go a lot of different things, but that's linked here. I don't think I have anything else. I mean, obviously the topic of the food is going to continue through that. We're going to go into other layers, a bit of dry fasting and stuff too. It's not going to just go only into emotion. I mean, it's all connected anyways, but I'm just in this flow right now. We're building off of it. We'll keep building off of it and see what else comes. But I really enjoyed this open Q&A. I mean, this is how I feel like most of the real goods come. And yeah. All right. Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful day. Love you all. Enjoy life. And see you soon. Bye now.